So I have the role to present Pedro. Pedro is a engineer from PhilP. He has a master in electrics and computer engineer. He then completed his PhD in machine learning and information system. I believe he was supervised by Carlos. Yeah. He then went to a postdoc in Chicago, where he started working with explainable AI and had a start on those kinds of concerns. He's currently working in Feedzai. He's leading the explainable and responsible AI group. So Feedzai is a Portuguese startup that is concerned with making sure that financial transactions are secure and easy, and his role there is to make sure that that happens, but I believe we will explain how Feedzai does that. So welcome. So the floor is yours.
All right.
So in English, yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Unfortunately, I could not be there due to some personal reasons. But it's with great pleasure that I'm here sharing some of the experience I've been going through in responsible AI research, in academia and in industry. And it's really great to see so many faces of colleagues, professors, and mentors. So I'm going to share my screen. And also, I need to say that I'm always very proud of coming back to PhilP, and always very proud of being part of PhilP alumni network. So let's get started. Carlos asked me to give a non-technical overview of what is responsible AI in practice, especially in a product company. I work in Feedzai is a product company. So how can we embed responsible AI in a product? What have been the challenges, and some of stories, tips, recommendations that I can share with the rest of the audience. So just very briefly, for those of you that don't know, Feedzai is now a scale-up, so we probably cannot be considered anymore a startup. We are already 700 people and growing. We became a unicorn last year, and it's really a global company. You can see there are like 10 offices, 4 continents. We have clients in almost in every possible time zone. What Feedzai provides is a financial risk management platform. So it can be seen as a software as a service. And it's really about managing risk across financial services. And this includes really from the start onboarding. When people are applying to open a bank account, we are already scoring the risk of the application being fraudulent or not. Throughout life cycle of customer journey includes every time you try to place a payment, you make a transaction from businesses, individual customers. Also, something that is really catching up the last few years, money laundering. So really employing AI to detect suspicious activity, human trafficking, sanctions lists. We have recent cases of the war in Ukraine. So it's financial institutions are getting pressure to employ anti-money laundering capabilities. So that's how we provide a wide range of capabilities across the life cycle of management. And it's very proud of seeing that, this is actually the official slides that, Feedzai uses with prospects and clients and analysts. And these 3 pillars about human-centered AI, the central one, very proud of that, of, being in a company that really takes responsible AI as a cornerstone in the product stack. And we really aim to be responsible by design. And this is quite a challenge because, this is a generic overview of the architecture. Being software as a service or AI as a service company, it's very difficult it's a complex task to, as a product company, to control how the users use your product. So this is a really powerful, complex infrastructure that processes trillions of events, protects trillions of dollars of transactions worldwide. And, we need to make sure that users of the product don't get any wrongdoing, because it's very easy to, discriminate people based on certain locations, based on certain background. So how can we, as a product company, because we are not selling the service, we are selling the software, how can we make sure that our products are used responsibly and they are like that by design? So the first question is, why invest in responsible AI? So Feedzai has been, working with explainability since 2015, and in fact, more direct investment in responsible AI started in 2019. I joined the company. We started a research group within the research department, and we have been influencing the company throughout the other departments, product, customer success, even sales, have been largely influenced by taking responsible AI as a cornerstone. And one could think that, responsible AI is an afterthought, is something that, is a burden, additional costs. But in fact, what we observe is that by being or trying to be responsible by design, we are in fact not only unlocking growth opportunities, it's a way of being a differentiator factor from other competitors, but also from a cost perspective. If we make sure that our systems work as intended, we are really mitigating the risk of having issues and troubles after deployment and while maintaining the systems. And, we had the previous presentation, really great to see different pillars, different examples. I'm not going to really delve in, concrete news stories. I think by now, it's very easy to Google about AI incidents, but in fact, the Partnership on AI realized that there were so many news stories that they even created an AI incidents database. So I really invite you to go and check these resources continuously being updated. And in our case, what actually means to have a financial crime prevention system that is biased? Imagine that you are in Brooklyn and you want to place a transaction. It can be paying a meal, trying to buy something online, and the risk of you getting blocked and not being able to place a transaction is 8 times, 10 times more higher. And you're a legit customer. I'm talking about a legit customer trying to make a transaction. You may have like 8 times more false positive rate than same legit customer, but in Manhattan, for instance. So this is the type of things that actually impact. That is not about the people, it's not about the behavior, it's just about the location. And this, of course, we know in US, location is a proxy for other social demographics, like income, racial distribution by zip code is really, segregation is really a thing in US. It's very easy to predict the probability of your skin color being brown or darker or wherever by zip code, for instance, or level of education. So, by blocking more legit customers through zip code, we may be indirectly blocking access to financial services, a discriminatory access to financial services. And in US, there is actually many anti-discrimination acts that consider financial services as essential services, and people have the right to have access of them, regardless of religion, age, background, color, race, ethnicity, and so on. We also have seen examples of responsible AI principles. There are different flavors. They all cover some of the core aspects that include, fairness, explainability, transparency, observability, monitoring, making sure that systems are safe, that they are the privacy preserving, that there is human oversight, that humans can override and control and provide input to the data that AI is trained on. Feedzai also adopted these responsible AI principles. And why are those principles so important? Because, in product management, you are always making decisions. So you're always deciding what should we prioritize in a roadmap, why should we invest in a given feature, in a given functionality, and having principles, in this case about responsible AI, needs to really be there. When you're making decision, you're creating a decision-making framework on product development, having into consideration the implications of these principles when making the decisions. So it's not just about having a blog post saying that this is our principles. It's actually making sure that they are considered when making these product decisions. We're going to give you just an overview of our FET research group. We are now 10 people, and we are in research. And I'll also explain why this started in research, because some of these technical issues are not completely solved from a technical engineering machine learning perspective. Some of these issues around fairness, explainability, robustness, dynamic environments, drift, observability, how to monitor models without labels in production. Most of these issues, they are not new, but they are also not solved. So that's why we need to have applied research within our scope to really tackle within our requirements, high throughput, low latency, highly unbalanced problems. We can have 0.1% fraud in a banking system. So how can we deal with this highly unbalanced? It's highly adversarial, the fraud. The concept is always shifting. Fraudsters are always adapting. And how can we make sure that our AI is not just robust to these conditions, but also have these properties that we are talking about, transparency, fairness, explainability, and so on. And some of our impact, I will share the slides with Carlos and João, so people can. I really invite you, to read, discuss. We are really always open to collaborations. We are producing patents and publications, and also innovations to product. We recently released our first open source package, and we have a few more in the making. So we expect this to really become a trend, because it's very hard to justify why do we have proprietary software or confidential software to audit and to create explanations. It is really against most of the principles that we strive in responsible AI. So we are also and the company is really eager in senior management to contribute to open source. And in fact, even the CEO of GameFace really commented on this package, which is producing sharp explanations for recurrent neural networks, which was something that was not there yet. And also with respect to the product, because I really want to pass a message that we are walking the talk. It's not just not that we are making lots of noise about responsible AI. We are really making sure that in our product there are functionalities that follow these principles and resolve some of these issues. So we have explanations not just for data scientists, but from other personas. And we're talking about fraud analysts. Are the humans in the loop sometimes making the final decision? We need to understand why the model came up with a given risk score. We are talking about everything around monitoring. So most of the issues we have post-deployment have to do with data ingestion issues. Models get degrade over time. There is a field that gets corrupted. You don't see it right away because the features are not super relevant, super important in certain cases, but over time it starts to really, the performance gets degrading. But because we operate in a system in which we don't get the labels right away of the decisions, there is a delayed levels and maturity of labels that we know. So we just know that something is not fraud if nobody complains about it, and this takes time. So how can we make sure that we have in place mechanisms for monitoring that give us reliable indicators of system performance from inputs and from outputs, of course. Everything about governance. So it's becoming really, really a big thing, governance. So we operate in a highly regulated domain, very similar with healthcare, financial services. Central banks demand risk assessments, governance reports about models. There has to be a clearance just for the features. If you want to add a specific new input data, you have to get approval to get more features for your models. And making sure that this is not really a burden for data scientists, making sure that we actually strive to make the standard. Because in some geographies, some central banks ask certain type of regulation and some certain of checks and balances. In other regulation, in other geographies, other people may ask other things, and we are a global company and we need to support these different regulations. So we even strive to be even more strict with respect to analysis and standards, so it gets compliant everywhere. And something that I'm also very proud of, joint work with Carlos. It was actually, this work started from a master thesis, this fairness over optimization. And it's really great to see in less than 24 months, something that got from an idea on a whiteboard to actually a product and something being used by the largest financial institutions of the world is something that is really amazing about the impact. And this is, once again, was a collaboration with FEOP, and Feedzai was even awarded FinTech Breakthrough Award. And in this case, it was work from Andre Cruz, and Andre even received the IEEE and master thesis in engineering 2021 award from the Portuguese Association of Engineering. I think that's the name of the association. Anyway, so we also have audits for bias and fairness, and we even incorporate fairness into multi-objective approach when selecting and training models. So BCG, run this survey about why the, trendsetters in responsible AI, why those early adopters of responsible AI, why they were adopting it. And one would expect that either social responsibility and ECG is also something that we can even discuss if it makes sense to consider responsible AI part of ECG. But, regulatory compliance would be something that, especially in this financial domain, would be the big reason why people would adopt responsible AI, why organizations would adopt. But in fact, these early adopters realize that it's all about business benefits in this case, because if we think about a system that is a black box, that neither the operators, neither the users using understand how the system performs, cannot really debug issues early on time, everything around fairness and discrimination. Something that if you have this straight false positive rates across a subgroup of your population, is because the quality of your product is not that good in those subgroups. So there are actually opportunities of revenue stream that are missing in quality of service. And I'm not even, and I want to make this implicit, I'm not even saying that because it's the right thing to do. Of course, it's the right thing to do. I'm even considering here from an organizational perspective, for-profit organizations in the private sector, from a business benefits of incorporating responsible AI is actually something that and even considering attracting and retaining talent. And before going to challenges, I cannot resist to share some of the principles or the frameworks of thought that, even started, I started working on these 5 years ago, almost, time flies. And, working with Raid Ghani in public policy, social impact projects is something that when I came to the private sector, I realized is actually the same. Is what's the point of making sure that your models are fair and then you have a rule that just blocks transactions that comes from a given zip code or comes from a given country or whatever. So it's about the whole systems, about software. It's about the humans that operate with the system. Because you may have, there is this concern about AI being biased, but, first of all, humans are biased. So why also not monitoring and evaluating humans' decision-making in the first place? Because for the end subjects, what matters is the actions and the outcomes. It doesn't really matter if it was an AI or a human that made the final decision. So we need to make sure that humans are also accountable in decision-making. And also about the action. So, a machine learning model in a given, predictive task, you have a test set, you have a performance metric, you can even measure some subgroup performance for fairness. But a model by itself is innocuous. What really affects people are the actions that are informed by the model. So different actions may affect different people differently. So you can think about customer support, or, a bank calls customers because transactions are flagged as high risk. So the fraud analysts, they want to verify with people if they're actually making those transactions. And they just support English language verification. In US, Spanish-speaking population is really, really large. And these will be highly discriminatory actions. So the same model, same predictions, but if the subject speaks English or if the subject doesn't speak English, the actions will have different outcomes and it will affect people differently. So it is really important that when we are designing systems, we bring the actions and the outcomes into consideration when performing risk assessment. Another thing that I also can't resist, and almost in every presentation I make, I have this, is I hear often it's all about the data. The data is biased. We need better data, and everything will be fixed with data. Actually, not. So data is just an artifact, reflects biases that are in the world. But every single decision we make when building a system will introduce some sort of bias. We are always making trade-offs. Missing values. How are we going to impute the missing value? Are we going to use the average? Are we going to use zero? Are we use models that can treat missing values? All of that will introduce some sort of bias. The metrics we use to optimize our point of operations for binarization and threshold. In fraud detection, there is no such a thing as a 0.5 score. We don't make binary predictions based on 0.5. We actually need to deploy systems on a specific ROC point. So there is a budget for attrition, there is a budget for false positives, and it's limited. So we often operate in points on the ROC curve that are below 1% FPR, sometimes even below 0.1% FPR. So measuring the bias in 0.1% FPR is not the same as using AOC or using 0.5 threshold. So all of these small business decisions when scoping the projects will affect the way the system affects end subjects. Human review, training of humans using the system, running A/B testing on humans, the actions, really understanding how punitive and how severe the actions are. Maybe we can have temporary blacklists of credit cards. Maybe we need to reach out to the customer. Maybe we'll really just freeze or block an IP address. And these will be reflected in the outcomes that will later populate the world. And what this creates a huge feedback loop. And sometimes there is a problem that is a challenge about selective labels. So the rejection inference problem, in which in many cases, when we decline a transaction, we never know if it was actually fraud. And how do we treat selective labels when retraining models? So these technical issues are things that is about the whole system. It's not about just the data. Because really, by measuring independence in variables and thinking that the data is a representative, we may even end up with, due to variance, of course, we may end up with a biased decision-making system. Also, I invite you, so Big Tech is starting now to get out standards. So I really invite you to have a check. It's a really beautiful document. It's a responsive AI standard from Microsoft. And the first actually consequence was last week. Consequence was that they will no longer develop or pursue any research on emotion detection with images, but they will simply stop researching emotion detection from computer vision. This is just an example of they operating the standards. Also, I think we will also talk about regulation today. I don't really want to dwell too much on the proposal that will be put in place. If you have naive high expectations, I want to curb your enthusiasm, because as with GDPR, this is very vague. It's proper of the EU legislation. There will be really vague, open to discussion means of compliance. Also, I highlighted here the way they are going with categorizing applications that are risk and low risk, and not so much the systems themselves, which is also a risk, I would say. More than saying that in this area is definitely always high risk, I definitely recommend to really assess each type of product independently, but okay, that's the way it will be. But think about essential private and public services would be for sure considered high risk. And now, just very briefly, just sharing some of them of something that we learned, which was Facebook and Meta created this open loop initiative. If you are working in small startups, I really recommend you can really apply to participate in these open loop initiatives. It's creating a regulatory sandbox. So imagine what they are doing is they hire third-party consultancy firms that elaborate what would be a regulatory piece, and we try to implement that regulatory piece to see what would be the impact. And this is, of course, to lobby and to inform the EU Commission about the impacts of doing this. We participated last year, and I want to share some of the understandings that I got from that. So anticipating a little bit what will happen within the EU regulation. So basically, what it implies that before you build a product, and they are going to use automated decision-making system, so it's really broad. It's not just AI; it can be software and rules. It's a bunch of if statements also fall under this new regulatory piece. So it's really to assess the risks on the rights and freedoms of natural legal persons. So whatever are we building, all that will affect people that will use the product or be affected by that decision making. And really also consult with stakeholders, including subjects, which is something that is not often the practice, but it's very good that they are trying to include that. And then you assess if it's high risk or low risk. If considered high risk, there is a bunch of checks that we need to do, from data provenance assessment, of course, everything that has to do with GDPR and consent has to be there, but really justifying all the decisions in the ML pipeline, of course, running bias audits. Just a side note, it was very curious to see that in the first draft of the document, the EU Commission was saying that you cannot be unfair, but you can also not collect demographic data. So how can you know if you are being unfair or not if you cannot use demographic data? Fortunately, they realized the loophole and already fixed it, and you can use demographic data for fairness assessments. And then you have to perform and prove that you're doing some risk mitigation. If not, you really need to go and consult supervisory authority to really discuss case by case. If everything is fine, you can deploy, but it's also very good to see that regulation is enforcing after deployment continuous auditing. So it's good to see that. Very quickly, some of the challenges. The first one, I'll say ethics washing and shallowness. It's very good to see many people talking about this. It's really hard to discuss ethics and responsible AI and trustworthy AI and so on. Every major company, you go to the blogs and there is a blog post about ethics. There is a blog post about responsible AI. But it's really important to walk the talk and to something that for us, and I can say us, engineers, our people working in engineering, is we are not really qualified to make the decisions. Our role is really to make sure that the decisions can be informed for the people making the decisions. So we often try to act like God and say, oh, this is wrong, this is what needs to be done, is making sure that we have the right frameworks and we collect the signals and we have robustness and reliability and mechanisms to incorporate fairness and explainability, but defining what is the right fairness metric, defining what means to be interpretable is something that is not just for engineering or data scientists. It's a multidisciplinary approach, and it's not just about diversity of backgrounds. It's really about we have a limited skill set as everyone else. So it's really important to have broader from legal, from public policy, from UX, from product, different people take into consideration how to make decisions around developing responsible products. Then it's something that is crucial, is sponsorship from senior management. This is one is obvious, right? So if senior management, C-level, board level, if they don't see responsible AI as something that worth investing, it's very hard to create business cases for having a product or a feature included in the product. So this is, of course, crucial. Then the one that I really want to, challenge the audience, it's about education and training. We know that machine learning is always rapidly evolving. There are always new topics coming. Now we have large language models, and people may think, oh, this is just a fad. This will be temporary. Education needs to be about ground fundamental topics, and I definitely agree with that. But responsibility, trustworthiness, ethics is not a fad, it's a fundamental concept that unfortunately worldwide there are still scarce offering on courses to give frameworks and tools for engineers to really learn to think about ethics as a framework. And engineers are really uncomfortable with vague environments and navigating ambiguity. And ethics is all about ambiguity and vague environments. So it's really important that we don't have that mindset of this is just a metric to optimize, and then it becomes something that I will use as a KPI. Is good to have that engineering mindset, but we need to be, powered by frameworks that we can really assess trade-offs. And I really challenge you in the audience to really consider not as an optional course, but really as mandatory, and even in bachelor level, to equip younger generations with tools to make decisions, informed decisions. Of course, tools and methodologies. Each one is responsible for that. Open sourcing. Big tech is working on that, but maybe it should not just be big tech developing the tools and methodologies. So it's very important that universities and public and academia really help with developing methodologies and tools around this. And then research, because as I said before, we need sponsorship from senior management because some of these issues are still open, and we need to invest in research how to tackle some of these issues. So research is always a challenge in these topics, and not because we have SHAP, we must assume that we have interpretable systems, which also kind of, I can say, a mistake that we often do, that we come up with a method and we assume the problem is solved. And definitely SHAP explanations as an example of something that has many issues as well. So we need to keep investing in research in these topics. And I really believe that in the future we can drop the name responsible and we'll just talk about AI, because why can we have AI that is not responsible and AI that is responsible? Who wants to buy AI that is not responsible when we have AI that is responsible? So I hope really in the future that we drop the responsible from the name, and I think it will happen. And with this, I just end this presentation.
So, thank you, Pedro, for the very nice presentation. Are there questions, please?
Hi, Pedro. Nice to hear from you again. Are you listening?
Let me just come closer to the speakers so I can hear you better.
Well, it's my question is a very simple one. I would like to know if in your Feedzai products, if the AI component is a kernel component, is it crucial? Is it just complementary, or can it be discarded at all? What happens?
That's a very good point. So, and that's also why I insist that we need to consider the whole system when thinking about responsible AI. So, yeah, I can say that it varies, and it also depends on the maturity of the financial institution. There are definitely use cases in which we can deploy just a rules engine system. By design, by default, there is AI component that is core. The risk models are core of the event processing, but there are some deployments in which the AI is not being used directly in the beginning. Imagine in the beginning where there are no labels, there is no data, there is a new product that is being launched, a new geography. It may be moments in which, or periods of time in which, in the beginning, there is just a rules engine deployed before the model.
Thank you. I have one question, because you said in the beginning that Feedzai sells products, not services. So it's more challenging to have products that incorporate all what you have said than if you were selling a service that you could somehow make sure that things are done properly. So can you elaborate a bit on that? How do you ensure that your products are able to be responsible?
That's a very, very good point. Thank you for I really like to develop that point. In the way we think about responsible AI is about risk assessment. So it's always risk management in the sense that it's not financial risk management or fraud or AML, I think, but risk management in the sense that we cannot guarantee a given outcome. And this is, I would say that in almost every application of AI, we may have a fraction of a certainty. So what we can do is to mitigate the risk of misuse or misbehave. So one of the things that we have are guardrails. So when people are really making decisions, changing parameters of the system, on the way the risk strategy is being deployed, because we have a workflow engine that you can combine different inputs, outputs, and so on, is really have first from a UX perspective that we have guardrails with warnings, and really there is different user levels of permissions for people to change some of these parameters. Not every user of a platform can use it, so it needs to escalate to a more admin maintainer kind of role. The other thing that we also do is, by striving to be responsible by design, is that we offer fairness awareness, for instance, by design. So people really need to turn it off explicitly. So people are constantly choosing to not optimize for fairness, either because they don't have data or because they decide not to do so. So these are also some of the steps of mitigation that we have. And of course, the governance reports that we make automatically have a component for fairness. And they say that when people don't audit fairness, there is no fairness has been measured in the governance report. So these small but important UX mechanisms that try to mitigate the risk of misbehaving, but as an event processing system, there is always the risk of not doing so. But also we have continuous checkpoints with clients. So clients report often how they use the system. So we can ask them optimize the usage of the system. So when doing these checkpoints, we also consider these aspects.
Okay.
So training and education of clients is very important.
So one more question.
Hello, Pedro. So you mentioned that one of the benefits that companies are taking from using responsible AI is business, not just compliance and so on. So does that mean, so for instance, how is the team that you lead evaluated in terms of what kind of goals does the company set for your team? Are there goals concerning developing products, also financial returns? Can you say something about it?
Well, that's something that I'm really open to share, which is, and I cannot go away without a football analogy. So let's go for it. So this is like, Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi. They are great while they score. If they stop scoring, you stop being great. So in the private sector and in the company, it's the same. You always need to deliver. You always need to prove the impact. So you get funds to get one more year of investment on your team and infrastructure and so on. So although our KPIs, direct KPIs, are measured about impact on transferring to products, IP protection, and adoption from clients. So we also, because we create, and I'm happy to then, even one day having a presentation about our research operating model, but we have KPIs for IP, KPIs for transfer to product, but also KPIs on the usage of the things we transfer to product. So we also help customer success, we work with clients how to operationalize, think about fairness-aware hyperpyramid optimization. How can we help clients adopt it, and how do they need to configure it? Because it's something new, and even the education process. But about the Cristiano Ronaldo and the scores kind of analogy, there is impact in the business that is directly linked to some of these innovations. So although we are not directly evaluated on that impact, those case success stories, we use that on senior management sponsorship and request for initiatives and for funding and so on.
Okay, thank you. Anyone has questions? No? So thank you very much, Pedro.
Okay, thank you.